Hi, I'm Eric Bolling in for Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching this O'Reilly Factor special drama on the Potomac. And what a dramatic day it's been, as Republicans surprised everyone by pulling the vote on their health care plan. House Speaker Paul Ryan gave a blunt assessment about today's setback in the effort to repeal and replace Obamacare.
We came really close today, but we came up short. I spoke to the president just a little while ago, and I told him that the best thing I think to do is to pull this bill, and he agreed with that decision. This is a setback, no two ways about it. But it is not the end of the story, because I know that every man and woman in this conference is now motivated more than ever to step up our game, to deliver on our promises.
Meanwhile, President Trump remained optimistic.
I worked as a team player and would have loved to have seen it pass, but again, I think you know I was very clear, because I think there wasn't a speech I made, or very few, where I didn't mention that perhaps the best thing that could happen is exactly what happened today, because we'll end up with a truly great health care bill in the future after this mess known as Obamacare explodes. So I want to thank everybody for being here. It will go very smoothly, I really believe. I think this is something that certainly was an interesting period of time. We all learned a lot.
President Trump was also pressed over the impact of the House Freedom Caucus on the health care bill's failure.
Do you feel betrayed by the House Freedom Caucus at all? They seem to be the most difficult to
No,
get.
I'm not betrayed. They're friends of mine. I'm disappointed because we could have had it. So I'm disappointed. I'm a little surprised, to be honest with you. We really had it. It was pretty much there, within grasp.
Joining us now with reaction, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, who's a close ally of the House Freedom Caucus. Now, Senator, do you think the president was indirectly referring to you specifically in those remarks?
No, but what I would say is I think I still have a great deal of optimism that we will come to a repeal of Obamacare. I mean, there's probably been nothing that has united Republicans more than our desire to repeal Obamacare. I think it led to our electoral success of taking over the House in 2010, the Senate in 2014, and winning the White House in 2016. So I think we are united on repeal. We're not so much united on the replacement part, but I still think it can be worked out. So I'm hoping that both sides will say we will continue to talk. I think that President Trump's been very open to many of our ideas. I just think we didn't have enough time, and we set an artificial deadline. And instead of saying we're going to work till we finally get this, I don't see any reason why we can't work next week, the week after, the week after. But we should work on repealing Obamacare, and I'm going to continue to be for that, as well as replacing it. There's some great ideas for replacement.
Right. So a lot of people we watched over the last 3 weeks. We watched the House Freedom Caucus saying, we're not on board yet. Explain it to us why we should be. They never got the answers they were looking for. But now, in the aftermath of the failed or pulled vote, people will say, obviously, they're going to say, hey, it's the House Freedom Caucus that held out. That's the reason why we now have Obamacare going forward. What do you say to those people?
You know, I think the Freedom Caucus wants what all conservatives want, and that is a repeal of Obamacare that ultimately lowers the price of insurance for people. If you look at the #1 problem of Obamacare, it's that people in the individual market go out to buy insurance and the premiums are soaring through the roof. That's the real problem. And that's why what I promoted as the #1 replacement is letting people join buying groups. And one of the unreported stories of this week is the House of Representatives actually passed my replacement version, or a similar version, for letting people join buying groups or co-ops to bring prices down. What I'm advising Senator McConnell and the leadership is that bill should be brought up next week. This is a bill that is a big part of replacement. We should bring that up next week and see how the Democrats will respond to that.
I want to show our audience a little piece of tape from earlier in the week where you actually went to the House Freedom Caucus side, and I guess you were teaching them the art of the deal. Take a look.
I brought you all a gift tonight, the art of the deal. I do think that it's important as we go into this that we realize we have enormous power. Actually, you guys have enormous power if you stick together. I put up a quote from the art of the deal that I thought was appropriate. The worst thing you can possibly do in a deal is to seem desperate to make it. That makes the other guy smell blood, and then you're dead.
And so is the lesson to be learned here that don't accept the first deal, but bring another one?
Well, these were Donald Trump. words, don't be desperate to make a deal. But at the same time, what I would add to that is that we are open to making a deal, and we still are open. Conservatives across the country want to repeal Obamacare. Unfortunately, as the House leadership brought this forward, they brought repeal and replace with Obamacare Light. Nobody ran on that, and no conservative across the land wants it. We could start over with repeal as the basis. And actually, some of the ideas, look, I love the fact that Speaker Ryan brought up
Senator, tell
the
me what happened.
association plans last week.
Listen, tell me what, and I see this, and I watch you guys out there and saying, let's repeal now because there's like bicameral support for repealing Obamacare. But what do you do with the people, or whatever, 9 or 10 million people who are on Obamacare? If you've repealed it, what do you do with them?
Well, here's the history of what has happened in the past. Dozens of times, the House of Representatives, under Republican leadership, has already voted for a clean repeal. They've already done it dozens of times. In the Senate, we've done it at least once. So what do we do with the people that government is currently providing health insurance for? What I want is every one of them to be protected by group insurance. So what I would do is open up every individual to be able to buy a group policy, which helps them to have leverage. And here's an example. AARP has over 30 million people. What if they had one person negotiating prices? They could push prices down. And actually, the House voted on this last week. Nobody's talking about it.
But Senator, I agree. I think there are some very smart things in the replacement, which you're talking about, a replacement. But in the interim, where you need, boy, there's a whole legislative calendar of getting it agreed upon at the House, going to the Senate, going to committee, back to the House. My point is, what do those people who are hung in the balance do until the replacement is found?
But here's part of the interim. Right now, we're still debating the repeal. We don't have that. So next week, the interim could be that the Senate brings to the floor part of the replacement that the House passed this week, the buying groups. If the Senate would vote on co-ops and buying groups next week, maybe Democrats would say, why would we want to prevent consumers from joining together to get a better price? Why would Democrats vote against the AARP being able to negotiate better drug prices and better insurance prices? I think it's such a marvelous idea. We should bring it forward next week. And if Democrats won't help with something that would really bring down costs, then it's shame on them. But we should go ahead and have that vote next week.
I got to go. And just to answer this question, though, Donald Trump has said as soon as this is finished right now, the health care debate, the issue, whether it becomes, it goes further or not or dies, he wanted to pivot to tax reform. Should Trump pivot to tax reform now or wait and try and do something, continue with health care? Are the American people still have a desire to hear about health care? Who knows how long?
I think legislators can walk and chew gum, hopefully at the same time. So why don't we do both? Why don't we set up a special committee with House Freedom Caucus?
So many people ask me, why don't they do both? Why does it have to be one at a time?
Well,
you tell me it doesn't.
And here's my suggestion to the White House. Get the Freedom Caucus in there. Get the House leadership in there. Get Senate leaders in there. And let's have a continuing conversation. Doesn't have to be at the breakneck pace that it's been the last 3 days, but let's keep talking about it till we work it out. If we're going to talk about taxes simultaneously and move legislatively to that before we have the answer, so be it. But you could work both tracks, and whichever one comes to a resolution first, bring it to the floor for a vote.
Senator, that's a really common sense solution. I really appreciate your time tonight. Thank you very much. Next on the rundown, we've got the inside story behind today's healthcare drama. We'll be right back with that. In the Impact segment tonight, Democrats rejoicing over the fate of the Republican healthcare plan.
Today is a great day for our country. It's a victory. What happened on the floor is a victory for the American people.
I am pleased and hopeful that this step today will be a step toward the continuation of a more perfect union.
This is a good day for the American people.
You sense a little bit of exuberance on our part, maybe just a little bit. It's on behalf of the American people.
Well, not so fast. President Trump is now training his fire on his Democrat opponents in Congress.
This year should be much worse for Obamacare. So what would be really good with no Democrat support, if the Democrats, when it explodes, which it will soon, if they got together with us and got a real health care bill, I'd be totally open to it, and I think that's going to happen. I think the losers are Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, because now they own Obamacare. They own it.
Joining us now with more from Washington, Fox News White House correspondent Kevin Corke, and from Capitol Hill, Fox News Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel. Mike, we'll begin with you. A little bit of early rejoicing on the Democrat side.
No question about that, Eric. They've been sitting back and watching the fractures on the Republican side and happy to see it fall apart essentially right before their very eyes. There were some nerves. It was a very tense day here on Capitol Hill. Statuary Hall behind me had a lot of traffic going back and forth to the House floor, to the leadership offices, trying to cut a deal. They needed 210 or 215 votes or so. One of the committee chairmen involved in this effort said they got to about 200. And we were hearing they thought they were trending in the right direction. But we were also hearing that they thought the final few votes would be the hardest to get. And so Speaker Paul Ryan went up to the White House and said, we're falling short. The president called it quits. Vice President Mike Pence came back down here to Capitol Hill to meet with House conservatives to try to get a few more votes. But some came out of the meeting and said, we are still no's. And so bottom line, rather than suffer an epic defeat on the floor of the House, they decided just to pull it down and have no vote today.
Right. And Kevin, when Speaker Ryan went to the White House, he came out afterwards and had that press conference fairly quickly. He said, I suggested we pull the bill. Was it his idea or was it Trump's idea?
I think there are two ways to look at this. If you're looking for winners and losers, for example, I think the short term is it's Speaker Ryan and the party in general, because I think there was an expectation that somehow he would be able to get this over the finish line. Long term, though, I think the president may not end up being the bad guy here, at least politically speaking. Let me explain. I know that Speaker Ryan came out and said, listen, I'm going to fall on the sword. I went to the president. I asked him to pull this bill. But long term, keep this in mind. If Obamacare somehow falls apart, or in any way, shape, form, or fashion doesn't live up to the promise that it made, that could be a net positive, not just for the president, but for the party. But certainly today, Speaker Ryan had to fall on the sword and came here to do just that.
Yeah, and Mike, last night we heard President Trump come out and say, look, I want to vote tomorrow. I want an up or down. I want to know if this is going to be, we're going to pass this on to the Senate or not. And he pushed, and then today, he didn't get his vote. The feeling from the congressional side.
Well, Eric, folks here on Capitol Hill give the president a lot of credit for a lot of meetings. There were a lot of lawmakers who had never been to the White House before for a face-to-face meeting with the President of the United States. He had moderates up there. He had conservatives up there. He worked it. He was on the phone all hours. He sent his top aides up here last night around this time. We had Reince Priebus, Bannon. We had Kellyanne Conway. We had Mick Mulvaney, the budget director. Today we had the vice president up here. It was a full court press. They gave everything they had. But bottom line, you had some conservatives who had their concerns. Once it was called Obamacare Light, it was hard to get them on board. You had some moderates in my home state of New Jersey. Leonard Lance, my hometown congressman, Westfield, New Jersey. Sure. He said some of these policies are popular with my constituents. I can't just vote to scrap it all. And so he had a conservative problem and a moderate problem and realized the complexities of this House conference.
Yeah, that was going on in the halls of Congress, Kevin, at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Was there a feeling or a sense that this vote was going to go down? Because around here, it's felt for a couple of days now that those votes weren't lined up, and this vote could clearly either go down or be delayed.
Yeah, there's no question. I think a lot of people here were hopeful. You may have watched the press briefing this afternoon, Eric, and you heard Sean Spicer, hey, whoa, you guys take it easy. Don't be so negative. Let's not kid ourselves. I think the entire room, and frankly, I think the entire journalism world kind of felt like this thing was going to go down. They were hopeful, as Mike just pointed out. They were furiously trying to make a rally for those last, say, 10 votes. They didn't have them. And I kind of had that sense, and I think the folks in the West Wing had that sense as early as late this morning. Kevin, it seemed to stand out that way.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but, from this standpoint, you watch these things. You watch these press briefings. You watch how the demeanor of people, and you could see there's certain, hopping a step when things are going good, a little bit less when they're not going good. And I got to tell you, you haven't seen that for a couple of days there. I think tax reform, guys, I think it'll be a completely different story, Mike, very quickly. This is one of those things where the moderates and the, let's call them Freedom Caucus, they can both get wrap their arms around.
Absolutely. Republicans definitely want to do tax reform. They feel like the president, as a businessman, has a very good case to make for tax reform. He understands the tax code. Healthcare policy is very complicated. There are a few people here on Capitol Hill that know all the complexity of it. Some of them had joined the president's team, so there was hope that they could bring it across the finish line. But bottom line, there were a lot of different ideas about how you replace it, and it didn't get done.
All right, guys, we're going to have to leave it right there. Thank you both. In the personal story segment tonight, critics are claiming today's health care bill failure is a major loss for President Trump. But could it actually turn into a win for his agenda? Joining us now to analyze from Boston, Adriana Cohen, columnist for the Boston Herald, and with us in studio, Democratic strategist Jessica Tarlov. I'm going to start with you, Jessica. It's a win. I'm going to make a declaratory comment, and you tell me where I'm wrong. It's a win for Donald Trump and a win for America.
No. It's a win for America. It's not a win for Donald Trump. Today, 24 million Americans got to keep their health insurance. And you know that I don't think Obamacare is perfect. And I hope actually that this will be an opportunity for Democrats and Republicans to work together on smart fixes for that. But Donald Trump, begrudgingly, it did take him a while, did throw his capital behind this. He went to talk to Republicans this week, the Freedom Caucus, and tried to bully them into backing him. Remember, he walked out, he singled out Mark Meadows and said, we're going to get this done, right? And he didn't end up being able to do that. So I don't think it's a win for him, and I think it hurts his ego, and I'm waiting for his tweets.
Adriana, let's put it this way. If this bill did actually make its way into law, and in 2020, President Trump is running for re-election, and all of a sudden these premiums are higher because the group that put this bill together never thought of the higher premiums in 2020, you could make a case that this failure is a win for Trump.
I definitely think it's a win for Donald Trump for precisely the reason you just stated, that if premiums are high, just as high as Obamacare or worse, that could cost him the election. It'll certainly cost Republicans the election in the midterms. And then also, you know, we know from last time around the CBO scoring ended up being wrong. They were off by 120%. So this time around, when the Republicans say, oh, we're going to bring costs down, how do we actually know that's going to be true? This could have hurt him later on, which you pointed out. Also, I think it's good for him to pivot now to areas where he can win, like tax and regulatory reform, you know, revising Dodd-Frank, renegotiating NAFTA. Those are all areas that'll be enormously successful for him and good for the American people. So I think he should pivot to areas that are really going to benefit the middle class.
Definitely
versus
pivot.
taking a risk.
Just let me ask you this, though. Okay, let's just say Obamacare starts to falter, Jessica, and straight politics now, okay?
Okay.
Starting to falter. You're not going to leave 12 or whatever, 9 or 12 million people out in the streets, so you're going to help them out. But in the meantime, you point out that Obamacare was so bad, and it's failing.
I didn't point that out. You pointed it out.
I'm
I said
saying
that there are
hypothetically,
problems with it.
this is the way this could play out politically.
Yes, that is a way that this could play out politically, and Democrats need to be aware of that, and they need to be willing to fix it. We've talked about this many times ourselves, saying you have something, it takes a huge amount of work to pass a piece of legislation like this. Props to Nancy Pelosi. I think we see how hard she worked to get this done. When you see
to get what done? A failing health care plan?
It's not a failing health care plan.
Well, it is. If prices continue to skyrocket,
of course they are. The cost of health care is lower than the lower rate than the 10 years.
Look, I don't want to go talk about the bill. I want to talk about the politics, Adriana. Here's how it plays out. It starts to fail. Donald Trump comes in and says, we're going to take care of the people who would be left on the sidelines because of this terrible bill that's failing. And then he says, here's the replacement that we should have had all along.
That's right. And, you know, Democrats have been saying, oh, with the new GOP health care plan, had it passed, 24 million may lose their health insurance. That would have been a really bad thing that would hurt Republicans and Donald Trump. So he actually dodged a bullet, in my opinion. I think Republicans need to go back to the drawing board. They need to cobble together a better replacement plan that will truly be better than Obamacare, because if they don't, they're going to be voted out of office in the midterms and in 2020.
But you guys had 7 years to do this. This is what and I know that Eric agrees with me here, and you didn't like the plan, Eric. You've talked about that since it came out. So you had 7 years to do this. You've run in 3 elections on repeal and replace. You couldn't get that done. And you think Donald Trump is going to come up with a good plan in the next 4 years? He's moving on. He wants his tax cuts.
No, he'll do that.
He doesn't want to deal with it.
No, Jess, he'll do that too.
Okay,
He'll
I'll
do
remember.
that. I mean, you have to. You ran on it. You can't just let that go.
You ran on it. Where's your border wall?
I got to go and say
Okay.
thank you to both of you.
Bye.
Directly ahead, the showdown between the leaders of the House Intelligence Committee is reaching a fever pitch. Segment tonight, the intensifying brawl within the House Intelligence Committee. Today, Chairman Devin Nunes and Ranking Member Adam Schiff escalated their war of words over the possible unmasking of Trump transition team members by U.S. intelligence agencies.
These reports that I read, for the most part, are valuable intelligence. However, I think there are just questions in those reports that I wonder does reach that threshold of foreign intelligence, and then you have to ask why were names unmasked. Not a full validation or vindication of the president, not a partial validation of the president, a zero validation of the president, even if you accept what the chairman has said.
Joining us now with more from Washington, Fox News Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge. Now, Catherine, there were some big developments today, specifically about them talking about, Nunes talking about bringing back James Comey and Admiral Rogers, I think on Monday, right?
Well, that's right. What they confirmed today, Eric, is that they are recalling the FBI director and the NSA director, and they're recalling them for a hearing on Tuesday, and it's going to be a closed, private briefing. It will not be open to the public. In order to make that happen, they have canceled a previously scheduled hearing with former Obama administration officials and the Deputy Attorney General. That's going to come at a later date. But to kind of decode it for folks at home based on these new documents, the Republican chairman wants to get more answers from the FBI director and the NSA director whose agency does surveillance before he then puts his questions to these former Obama administration officials who really have inside knowledge about what they were doing at that time.
Okay, so, but, and you point out that this is a closed door meeting. Why is it closed door? I mean, what, they feel like they'll get more information if it's behind closed doors?
Yeah, they're going to get more information, plus the level at which they're talking is at a classified level, and very little would be unclassified. I specifically asked the Republican chairman today if he was recalling the FBI director because he felt his testimony this week had not been forthcoming. He said no, it's based on the new records and it needs to be in a classified setting because they're so sensitive.
Okay, and very quickly, I got to go, but will these Clapper, Brennan, et cetera meetings, those will be where we can all hear the way they're answering?
Well, that's a good question, too. The original plan was to have them publicly testify, and that was going to be next week. That is now going to be rescheduled, and it's not clear, at least based on our reporting, whether that may be private, too. It's going to depend a lot on what comes out of that hearing Tuesday, so you're going to have to watch and wait.
Oh, absolutely, Catherine.
Okay.
It's actually the best TV out there, best reality TV you can think of. Catherine Gillian Turner, a former national security staffer, along with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research. Okay, let's unpack this. Tony, let's start with you. Yeah. Let's unpack this a little bit. Sure. There seems to be a lot of misinformation, disinformation, who knows what going back and forth behind closed door meetings.
Right.
When are we going to get to the bottom of this, of all of it?
Well, first, you know, it's ironic now, Eric, if you look back, no one on the Democrat side was raising Cain when all the unvetted information from that British source was put out there. Let's just get that as a framer. But with that said, Eric, there's a lot of sensitive methods and capabilities now being discussed behind closed doors. And as Catherine said, they're going to do two things. And I've been in closed hearings. Closed hearings allows you to disclose up to the logical classification level, not everything, but up to a level of what the methodology was used, and not only that, what the authorities were exactly. I've run these sorts of operations, and let me tell you something. You know, 10 years ago, when
Colonel, let me ask you: does that mean they can say who unmasked General Flynn's name?
Absolutely. It'll be that level, because it'll go down to exactly which keystroke unmask which name, which tells you exactly who struck that keystroke. More importantly, we're talking about, even if that was authorized, Eric, if you take on the face of it that this collection was authorized, which I think is questionable, you then have to figure out who authorized the unmasking, and more importantly, who then authorized the wide dissemination, which is the biggest issue, because that was leaked to the New York Times.
Colonel, let me bring Gillian. So,
Sure.
and I agree, Gillian, that a lot of this, the actual surveillance may have been legal, may have been legal, but it's the leaking and the unmasking that I think they're going to end up having a big problem explaining.
Yeah, that's the key. That's because even if, you know, intelligence on President Trump and his communications personally got swept up incidentally in foreign intelligence collection, is still, as you say, perfectly legal. The problem here is you can't designate people by their names. You can't give their identities and then circulate this stuff around the intelligence community. That's what we're going to have to deal with here. So we're really, with this whole issue, this whole debacle, coming back to the problem of we got to tamp down on the leaks. National security leaks are a crime, and somebody's got to start really holding people's feet to the fire.
Right. And there's a lot of news that keeps pumping out. Colonel, I want to do this. I'm going to set this up a little bit. So Adam Schiff is the Democrat on the panel who felt like he went a little bit too far. I'm going to play a little soundbite. Sure. Tell me what you think about this, specifically about evidence and what he has. Listen.
There is more than circumstantial evidence now. So, again, I think...
So you have seen direct evidence of collusion?
I don't want to go into specifics, but I will say that there is evidence that is not circumstantial and is very much worthy of investigation.
And, Colonel, the reason why that's important, there are two types of evidence. There's circumstantial and there's direct, meaning I saw it. I know it happened specifically. He says it's not circumstantial. Is he saying he's got a smoking gun?
Yes, that's what he's saying. But then again, this has been managed by innuendo. This has been death by a thousand cuts of innuendo. Eric, let's remember that every time this is leaked to the other side, to the other media, it's always anonymous sources. Look, several of us have gone on record on your network and others and said, look, people like, we believe Jim Clapper and John Brennan were probably the ones leaking this. And it's like it's time for the folks who have the so-called smoking gun to cough it up. And so it's time, a long past time, for that to happen. And Eric, as we've stipulated here, this is, in my judgment, a MacGuffin. The old term of MacGuffin, the throwaway in Hollywood, where you get, that's what this is. They don't want to talk about the fact that someone's going to get caught, probably has gotten caught, unmasking and disseminating information illegally.
Jillian, James Clapper. Clapper's the guy who testified in front of a Senate panel saying that there was no mass data mining of the American people under oath, and he had to walk that back. Tell me, are we going to have another one of these?
It's unfortunate, and that's what we're dealing with again now. It's like, is our government spying on us? It's a very basic civil liberties, civil rights question. People understandably want to have it answered. I just want to point out, though, I think that we can't only point out fouls on the Democratic side. I think what Chairman Nunes did by going direct to President Obama on some of this stuff, regardless of what it was about, the content is not relevant. Right. I think that was more than a process foul. I think that was really a bad move. I just want to point it out because I think, in the interest of being fair and balanced.
I got to go. President Trump, you mean, going to President Trump. Well, we're going to leave it right there, Jillian and Tony. Thank you very much.
Sorry,
thanks, All right. When this O'Reilly Factor special returns, Maryland lawmakers under fire for passing legislation to make it a sanctuary state just days after the Rockville rape case involving 2 illegal immigrants.
The O'Reilly Factor, the #1 cable news show for 16 years and counting.
Thanks for staying with us for this special edition of the Factor Drama on the Potomac. I'm Eric Bolling in for Bill O'Reilly. And in the Factor follow-up segment tonight, sanctuary cities and states. This week, Maryland's House of Delegates voted overwhelmingly to turn Maryland into a sanctuary state despite the governor's veto threat. The vote happened in the shadow of the Rockville, Maryland rape case where 2 illegal immigrant students are accused of sexually attacking a 14-year-old girl in their high school bathroom. Today, Maryland's Republican governor condemned the county where Rockville is located.
Montgomery County is acting as a sanctuary county, and they are not cooperating with federal authorities. That's a big part of the problem.
Joining us now with reaction from Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, Fox News contributor Steve Cortez, and from Baltimore, Keith Haynes, a Democratic member of Maryland's House of Delegates, who co-sponsored this week's sanctuary bill. Delegate Haynes, I'm going to start with you. So just days after this atrocious rape case, you guys voted to turn Maryland into a sanctuary state. Why?
Well, let me first of all say that the state of Maryland has been progressive when it comes to issues of immigration in this area. And what we sought to do was to put forward this legislation called the Trust Act to basically to restore community trust between the community and law enforcement as we see things that are happening on the federal level.
But Delegate, did this case, this rape case, this days prior come up, and when you're debating whether or not this is a good idea?
Well, let me just emphasize that this was an issue that did come up, but when you look at the incident that happened in Montgomery County, which is a horrific situation by all means, we know that, but there really isn't an immigration component when you look at the allegations that took place.
Come on,
And
sir. What do you mean there's not an immigration component? These two were illegals in your county who allegedly raped a 14-year-old girl, a 17-year-old and 18-year-old illegal. I got to bring Steve in, but boy, that is immigrant. It's the definition of what we're worried about.
But let me explain. Let me
Quickly,
explain
please.
what I mean. Let me explain what I mean with that. Is that under the state law as it is now in the state of Maryland, a local law enforcement police agency could not detain these individuals. They had no record. They had no affiliation with any gangs, and so they could not have a federal
Delegate Haynes, I got to bring Steve in.
crime.
My mind is blowing on this right now, but I'm telling you, Steve, go ahead. This is the reason why sanctuary cities are not popular and are dangerous.
Right, and it's also, by the way, one of the reasons why Donald Trump won, this kind of cognitive dissonance. I will tell you, as an Hispanic who loves legal immigration and as a father of teen girls, this story horrifies me. And to say there's no immigration component, Sanchez was caught at the border. Now, that should have been the end of the story. You're illegal, return to sender. Instead, he was released. He goes to Maryland, and then Maryland authorities decided to put a grown man, an 18-year-old, in a class with a freshman girl, a child who sadly, Eric, may never really be a child again because of the way she was traumatized by these two illegals who should never have been here in the very first place.
All right, Delegate Haynes, I'm going to let you answer that. Go ahead.
Yeah, but absolutely. True. These two individuals were undocumented, on legal status when they were here. Yes, they were in custody. But under federal law, these individuals, because of their age, were released to the Department of Health and Human Services, and in turn given to custody.
I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be rude. But this is Steve.
But let me finish. But let me finish. And so Maryland, under state law, a local enforcement agency, whether it's the police, constitutionally cannot detain those two individuals. It is a horrific situation.
I'm going to give you a very quick final thought, Steve, but this is the problem. These are things that fall through the cracks, and people get hurt, and young girls get raped.
Eric, you know, what happens is liberal elites love to talk in theory about what they see as social justice and what's popular at universities. The reality is, on the street, policemen, victims have to live with the carnage of these policies. And by the way, in many cases, the victims are Hispanics themselves, which just happened in Los Angeles, where a 5 times deported man killed a young, beautiful Sandra Duran mother in the United States. So Donald Trump ran and won largely on the notion that we're going to take our country back from the elites and these kind of misbegotten policies.
Gentlemen, I have to leave it right there. A hot debate, absolutely. Thank you very much. And a quick